I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for August the 9th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the flood expectation are mine alone, and if you're going to make any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to the local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. We have two systems to talk about across the tropics in the world this week. We've got Typhoon Maria sitting well southeast of the coast of Japan, and this is forecast to curve back towards the coast and could impact the central and northern part of the coastline as we go throughout the next several days. We've also got a tropical wave in the Atlantic that's forecast to move towards the Caribbean islands. You can see it here on this loop within the intertropical convergence zone. It's a broad one, but it will be moving west throughout the next couple of days, or several days rather. And by, say, early next week, we'll be looking at the system approaching the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and we could see development from that. But we'll talk about this one towards the latter half of the video, as we're going to focus first on Typhoon Maria, which is sitting pretty far north this morning in the West Pacific. This line is 30 degrees north of latitude, and this is in the subtropics of the West Pacific, and this is going to continue gaining latitude before it curves back into Japan as we get some blocking high pressure forming further north. Now, right now, the system is dealing with some dry air and wind shear. You can see that we have sort of this drier slot of air kind of encapsulating around the center of circulation, which maybe something is trying to happen with that. Maybe that little dimple there is trying to be an eye. Maybe it's trying to close off its eyeball again. But overall, the system is struggling a lot in the face of that shear. We had a quicker intensification phase over the past day or so, which allowed it to get to typhoon intensity. But all day today, and really all night, local time that is, we haven't really seen all too much further intensification given this type of pattern with all this dry air getting surrounding it, but also that southwesterly shear putting pressure on that eye wall. Now, this environment is forecast to get a little bit more favorable as we go throughout the next several days. This is the GFS upper level wind plot out to Saturday morning local time, and you can see that here's this southwesterly flow currently impacting the system, and this is now away from the system, so it moves out of where the southwesterly flow is. And we also have this trough digging in over northern Japan, and this allows the upper level divergence to spread out more towards the north, and this allows a fairly low shear environment to take place. Now, there may be some issues with drier air, as we do have cooler water just north of where the system is, but this could easily allow the system to intensify some. You can see in the H-Wharf, as it comes north, it will have waters to deal with, very warm waters relative to normal. And you can see that it intensifies on the model down to the 960s in pressure. And there's also some deeper water here. If we look at the oceanic heat content, you can see that there is a pocket of deeper water where the system is forecast to track, and that also, alongside those two other factors I mentioned, could allow the system to intensify some. Now, once it gets towards the coast of Japan, it's going to likely weaken some. As you can see on this oceanic heat content map, it does drop off fairly quickly as you get towards the coastline of Japan. And if we look at this map again from the H-Wharf, pay attention to the waters just off the coast of Japan. As it begins to pull winds from this, it begins to upwell waters fairly quickly because we don't have a lot of oceanic heat content there. And really, as the center moves over there, we start to really cool down the waters off of eastern Japan. And now this model is showing it going right over waters that could be 25 degrees Celsius, which is not really favorable for the system. And this will likely cause the system to weaken as it comes towards the coast. Now, what you'll notice in this track is it sort of does a sort of hook track. We kind of get it to come north here, and then in this run, it's hooking back southwest towards Tokyo. And this is a little bit of an uncertainty that we have in this forecast. This is the GFS Ensemble 500 millibar height anomaly chart, and you can see a few features that we've got in place right now. We've got this high pressure off towards the east. That's what's helping bring in the system north. And we have this trough here, fairly weak one, but a trough nonetheless over northern Japan. Now, an aspect of this trough being fairly weak, it's likely going to weaken, and you'll see it weaken here on the model. And what's going to happen is that these two ridges, the one east of Maria and one over Russia, are going to connect to each other so that you get this ridge building that's going to turn the system off towards the west. And you'll see this happen as I go through the model, that trough weakens and the ridges combine. They connect to each other. And now Maria, being south of this, is being forced west. Now, the uncertainty is, exactly how quick does this happen? How quick does that trough decay? And where's Maria relative to this? We've had some models try to put the system north of Tokyo. In fact, the current Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast, which I'll show you in just a little bit, has this going well north of Tokyo into more of northern Japan. But you can see on this ensemble mean, we've actually got a range of tracks going, northern coast of Japan to Tokyo, or even some solutions that are south enough that they just parallel the coast of Japan. And, that brings a question, could you see some intensification because waters do warm up here? And so there's a lot of uncertainty on exactly what's going to happen here. And if we look at model guidance from the GFS ensemble, you can see that there is quite a spread here. Like I mentioned, we have that spread like the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast cone. And then we have some tracks here that come in even south of Tokyo. And this is a little bit of fine detail that we really will not be able to pinpoint exactly for at least a couple more days. We really need to see exactly how this pattern is going to shape up as we go throughout the next couple of days. And that's going to likely lead to a lot of track deviations as we get towards the coast of Japan. Now, one thing that's important is if the system does hook back enough to, where it comes to Tokyo, the unfortunate aspect of this approach angle is it's a bit awkward with the way Japan is laid out along the coastline. Because if you get the system coming into Tokyo, well, okay, you've already gotten to Tokyo, but if it's a little bit further south, say it misses Tokyo, then you get the system paralleling this coast, and then a little deviation to the north can change this track or this landfall spot quite a lot. I mean, you can end up with what could be a Tokyo landfall or a landfall much further down the coast with not much of a northward or southward trend in this track. And this makes it a little bit more sensitive here for Japan. Now, like I talked about, the good news is we're forecasting the system to weaken, and it should, because we do have cooler shelf waters here off of Japan. And that should weaken the system from whatever its peak intensity is. Though I should mention that it's possible that if it hangs south enough, it could maintain intensity a little bit more. Rather, if it does take this more northern track that you see here on the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast, where they have it intensifying to, say, a Category 2 equivalent. Here's a typhoon east of Tokyo, and then weakening as it comes into northern Japan as a tropical storm. And you can see that kind of range that they have. They have some a potential here shown in this forecast for it to come south, potentially closer to Tokyo on their forecast track. So make sure you're staying very closely tuned to the Japan Meteorological Agency if you're in Japan on the system, and I'll have more videos on this as it goes throughout this entire forecast period into next week. We're going to move now to the Atlantic as we have another system to watch across the Atlantic as we're getting further into August. Now, we do have still Debbie sitting over the eastern United States. It's really just stalled here across Georgia and South Carolina over the past few days. It's finally pushing out of those regions after dumping, 15 to 20 inches of rain across that region. Though we do still have continued flooding risks all the way up the U.S. East Coast, and a tornado risk as well in the mid-Atlantic and New England as it does continue north. So stay safe as Debbie continues to push through. But our next system is way down here in the tropic, because we are getting to that time of year where we really start watching these tropical waves as they come off of Africa. And right now we've got one sitting southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. You might be able to pick out some circulation here within the monsoon trough, and that's your tropical wave that we're watching for potential development. And this is going to continue moving west-northwest throughout the next several days, and by early next week it was forecast to be in the vicinity of the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico. And the environment does look favorable for the system to develop, which may be a common trend as we start to see more waves come off of Africa in the coming months. Now, this is a GFS ensemble, excuse me, as the system moves west. This is day 5 as it moves into the northeastern Caribbean. And you can see these red numbers are areas of low pressure. So these are potential locations for the system to be by day 5, which is Tuesday morning local time. And as we get towards this time frame, you can see We have that wave axis pretty well shown in those isobars, but a lot of models are developing this into a tropical cyclone as it does get to the northeastern Caribbean. Now, the European does also have a lot of members showing this low being in that general same vicinity, though it does seem a bit weaker on the European ensemble, not as keen on being a tropical cyclone that early, but eventually these models do develop into a tropical cyclone. And the deterministic run of the European does show a storm as it exits the Caribbean later in its track. Now, overall, the environment does look favorable. You can see that as the system tracks across the tropical Atlantic, which at this point it would be here, we have strong easterly flow aloft, which this could lead to some issues with maybe some easterly shear in the mid to upper levels. But one thing to remember is we do have still strong easterly flow across the tropical Atlantic. And this, aligned with that stronger upper level flow, can decrease the shear amounts overall. So overall, despite we have, those stronger winds in the upper levels, that does look more favorable for the system. We've seen some models trying to suggest that it could start developing around this time as the environment is getting more favorable. It's also getting a little bit more moist by this time. Now, once it gets to the northeastern Caribbean, you can see we start to get this upper level high pressure system developing right on top of the system. Now, this may cause some increase in westerly shear because we do have some winds of 15 to 20 knots out of the east going towards the west across the Caribbean, still some of those stronger trade winds, and that could cause some moderate wind shear as it passes through here. Though that shear is not forecast to be overly high, and eventually it does decrease, and model guidance is getting much more in agreement that we could be seeing something that could intensify in the Western Atlantic as it goes into mid to latter half of next week. But of course, first we're going to focus on the Caribbean, as that does have a lot of determining factors for the future of the system. And I'm not going to speculate all too much on what could happen in the long term of the system. We're 5 days plus out from the system being in the Caribbean. There's no use in doing that. There's a lot that can change. And I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. But for the Caribbean islands, we're not expecting, an intensifying hurricane here. Well, we're not to that point of the year yet. But it is forecast to be developing by the time it's in your area. So we could be looking at a tropical storm coming through in the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola. Now, this is the current tropical weather outlook from the NHC. You can see they're giving the system about a 50% chance of development already. As it does track west, you can see that coming through those Caribbean islands. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of questions for the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and the eastern United States. What can happen after? One thing that's important is that, like I said, this is 5 days and higher in advance. So it's impossible for me to tell you what's going to happen in long range. Just as an example, we don't know exactly how far north or south the system is going to go. You can see in this development area, we have this storm that could track north of the Caribbean islands. It could avoid Puerto Rico and Hispaniola entirely. In that kind of a track, you could get into intensifying storm in the environment modeled in the Western Atlantic, and you could get an intensifying storm in that part of the basin. On the other hand, you could have the system tracking further south, and this could allow the system to, develop, but it has the issue of potentially ramming directly into Hispaniola, which has very high terrain and is notorious for being a tropical cyclone killer. If a tropical storm goes right over that, it can really struggle afterwards, even if the environment is fairly favorable afterwards. And that alone is just causing a lot of big trouble. But the other big aspect is the steering pattern across the subtropical latitudes. Further north of the system. This is a GFS ensemble 500 millibar height plot out to about 7 days. So our system is about here, north of Hispaniola, by this model frame. And we've got a few features to pick out. We've got a high pressure system here over the southern United States. We've got a ridge and trough here over Canada. This is an anticyclonic wave break pattern. So we've got troughiness forecast to be in place here south of Atlantic Canada. And we've also got high pressure here over the Azores. Now, this has been changing a lot on different models. I want to show you the GFS 18Z run as an example of this. You can see that as we start this, we have the same general picture. Troughiness here, ridging here, and we have, again, that anticyclonic wave break pattern over Canada. Now what happens is that this ridge allows this part of this trough to split off. So you get an upper level low to cut off in this eastern part of the US as this trough departs. The difficulty with this is that now you're getting high pressure to develop here with Bermuda, and now that this ridge pulls out, you could get these ridges connecting here in the western part of the Atlantic. And this offers a wide array of potential tracks. I'll point out just a few. One, this could go out to sea harmlessly away, not impacting many land areas after the Caribbean. This could also easily force a system into the northeastern US or Atlantic Canada, if this ridge especially is further west. Or if this upper low is going to be here, which this trough has also changed a lot in a lot of model forecasts, it could help to pinwheel the system northwest into the eastern United States. And I'm pointing these out because this is to highlight the uncertainty that we have at this range. This is August 18th on this forecast. This is over a week out, nearly 2 weeks out. So we have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things are going to change. And you're going to see a lot of model forecasts posted online, and there's probably going to be some talking about, Northeast US, watch out for a hurricane on your way. That's untrue. We don't know that that's going to happen, and there's a lot that can stop that from happening. I'll show you some prior runs of the GFS, and you'll see that not only does the trough over the US change, this ridge changes over the eastern United States, the ridge over Canada changes, and this changes the storm as well in terms of speed, how far north or south it was in the Caribbean, but it also changes the storm itself, these steering patterns, and what it does in those model forecasts. So there's still a ton of uncertainty on exactly what's going to happen. So try not to get caught into, these model maps that just say are being posted on social media. Just understand that, there is a potential for tropical development, and eventually something may come north out of this. But aside from that, we don't know much about what could happen in its future. And it's not worth speculating into, where it's exactly going to track once it does come out of the Caribbean. And it's just important to keep that in mind. And of course, stay prepared. It's hurricane season, it's peak of hurricane season. Everyone along the coast knows that you got to be prepared just in case a storm does come your way, especially as we go into peak season. And especially be prepared. I believe this is the start of our active period in the Atlantic. It looks like things are going to ramp up after this as we go out into late August and into September. So buckle up as we have an active peak of hurricane season likely on the way. That's all that I've got for today. Thanks for watching, and stay safe in Japan as Maria does come through. I'll have more videos over the next few days on the system as it comes north. That's all that I've got for now. Thanks for watching.